All right, everybody. Welcome to Dwell Church. So excited that you are here. I made this little bumper video. Very proud of it. Very proud. Okay. And this is a non-traditional setup that we do maybe once a quarter or 3 times a year. We call it conversation-based worship. You are about to give a gift, and it is a gift of letting someone else know you. So thank you for being brave enough to do that. Every week we come and I have to explain to somebody it's conversation-based worship, and they make the same joke where they pretend to leave. So I know that some of you in your heart would rather be somewhere else, but I appreciate the bravery. And more than that, the generosity to start building a community here at Dwell. We are a 59-week-old church plant, and we're built on 5 core values. We want to be Jesus-centered, research-based, trauma-informed, diverse and affirming and inclusive. And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about those today. The format here is I'll share a little bit about some kind of core-most questions for Dwell. Today we're tackling how do we be a church that the Bay Area wants to go to? What does that phrase mean? And that leads us naturally to how do we have values that organically resonate? We want to have values, the first thing we say about ourselves to the world, where people look at it and say, I don't know what it means, but I want to be a part of it. So that's what we're trying to build here at Dwell. Also, along the way here, and today we'll invite you to take part in Sustainability 3.0. That's something that we'll be running this whole spring. The 3 next steps there for Sustainability 3.0 are to become a financial partner. We'll have some updates about that at the end here. To join a builder team, one of our dreams is that everybody here has a job that is meaningful to them and everybody helps to build Dwell Church. And then lastly, you can sign up to do some experimental daily spiritual practices if you aren't already doing that. So that's what we have going on this season. Of course, after church today, maybe the most important thing you'll do today is go to Fieldwork and continue these conversations. It's a great opportunity to talk to someone else than the people at your table. So if you would love to do that, we'll be there at 6:30. It's going to be fun. That's part of something we're calling Opportunities to Connect, and we'll keep having those all spring. Okay, let's talk about Welcome to Dwell Part 3. In Part 1, there's my name. I made that. It's good, right? Okay, in Part 1, we talked about the story of Dwell in 3 gifts. One of the gifts that I was personally given was a sabbatical, where I got to go and pray and say, what's the church that I desperately want to work at? And Katie, I wrote it all down, and Katie, my wife, said, that church doesn't exist. You'll have to make it. So here we are. Good job. The second gift was God has brought amazing people to Dwell Church. Probably the single most incredible thing in the story of Dwell is the really wonderful and unexpected and high-quality amount of people that come to Dwell. You all are amazing, and I'm really honored to be doing this with you. Lastly, the gift that we talked about there is, I think, a deeper, better understanding of what the gospel is. You and I probably have heard the same gospel sometime in our lives growing up, that Jesus died for your personal sins so that you might one day go to heaven. And all of those component bits are true, but if that was the sum total of the gospel, it would be too small. That Jesus was preaching something far more majestic. That he said he would be with us. That his arrival as a human being and his death and resurrection meant that all the obstacles between us and him were removed so that he could be with us. And that his good news was that we could spend our days in conversation with him under his guidance and in his wisdom. That is a grander conceptualization of good news. And we're trying to see, what does it look like to build a church based on that? So one of the things that we say based on this broader, grander gospel is that the center of the target for human life is a conversational friendship with Jesus. That's the main thing we were made to do. So that's what we're doing together. Then last week, Brian talked quite gracefully and insightfully about being a new church for a new era, and we think that that phrase means 4 things. First of all, it means that we're discerning what are we called to that 10,000 other churches aren't. And that's a new way of doing things. There was an old way in the world where every church was sort of implicitly making the case, we're doing it right, and everyone else should be doing it like us. That was, I think, implied at all the churches that I went to. Here we're embracing, what if every church was called to something unique by Jesus, to express his love to the world in a unique way? What are we called to that other people aren't? And that means that we can cheer those other churches on. You're called to something different. And even if we have fundamental disagreements about important things, which of course we do, we can also say, you're called to something different, and we will cheer for you as you go after that calling. It also means that we can situate ourselves as learners. They're called to something else, and we're going to learn from whatever they're doing instead of, say, oppose or compete. So it puts us in, I think, a more fruitful relationship to the thousands and thousands of other churches that we might be thinking about along this journey. And lastly, insightfully, Brian said that it means we're going to let go of some certainty. That part of what we have to do together is discern what God is calling us to. And we have to do that in a way where we are all participating and listening to each other, to the world, and to Jesus' Spirit. And that means we have to loosen up our grip on what we think that Dwell should be doing or that God is saying to us, so that way we can create an environment where we are listening. And we'll talk more about uncertainty in our series after Easter called Unlearning the Bible. And then this week we're talking about some key things here. As I said, how do we be a church that the Bay Area wants to go to? Or how do we have values that organically resonate? Part of the argument that we are making here, here are our core values. I said them already, but I just like them. Let's say them again. Jesus-centered, trauma-informed, research-based, diverse, affirming, and inclusive. Got a close friend. She came to one of our vision and fundraising events, and she said, 4 of these could be any organization, so explain to me why those are important. And we talked about it for a while, and she said, I think what you're trying to say is that in your mind, those 4 nest under the Jesus-centeredness. That if you were to center your life on Jesus, you would naturally want to become a trauma-informed, research-based, diverse, affirming, and inclusive organization. And I was like, yes, you should have my job. You're in charge now. So that's what we're talking about here. One of the ways I like to think about this is kind of cultural commentator and pastor Mark Sayers, Australian guy, said this. Modern progressives want the kingdom without the king. The progressive values actually map quite closely to, say, the Sermon on the Mount. But what the political progressive movement that some or most of us imagine ourselves to be a part of, what they're trying to say is, can we do this without the religion, church, and spirituality? And I think that is a fair question to ask, one which we're going to be determined to answer. But people that we might most closely relate to out in the world, what they are trying to build in their mind is how do they be their concept of a good person without the spiritual or moral framework that we have come to treasure. There's a great book on this, which is called The Air We Breathe. And this guy, Glenn Scrivener, is making the argument that a whole series of progressive and American values were built really quite profoundly on the teachings of Jesus. The part of the case that we want to make in the world is that I hold some of my progressive values, most of my progressive values, because of my faith, not in tension with it or not despite my faith. That it was my faith in Jesus that helped me embrace things like equity and inclusion. That's part of the argument that we are making. But this guy, Glenn Scrivener, goes even further. Here's his list. These are the chapters in this book. Equality, compassion, consent, enlightenment, science, freedom, and progress. And he makes the case that without the Bible, through which the Holy Spirit was moving into Western culture, these things would not be a part of our world. The things, you might have all kinds of criticisms about America or the Democrats or the progressives. I certainly do, and part of what we will do as Dwell Church is voice very loud and I think very important criticisms of that bunch, America, Democrats, progressives. But the parts of America that we like, the parts that we would fight for, the parts that we believe in and maybe could still be proud of, we are making the case that those are actually Jesus values. And so for science, for example, Jesus sort of real forthrightly says you have to love God with your mind. And the whole enterprise of the scientific method and being rigorously honest about things, gosh, that can be built right off of loving God with our mind. The original scientists, that's precisely how they thought of it. And so the case that we're making is that whatever progressive values we might have, we hold those values because we were first followers of Jesus. Now, part of what we want to say then is, what is it like to live a Jesus-centered life? And we're going to keep talking about that over and over again. We're probably going to talk about that every Sunday for the next 59 weeks. But today we're looking at that particular question from the framework of how do we be a church that the Bay Area wants to go to? And I think that right at the heart of everything that Dwell Church does is a calling to talk about God in such a way where it meets the deep ache in our hearts. That we have to talk about God in a way where we naturally say, oh, if that's what God is like, I would show up every time for that. And one of the ways I look back over my life and the churches that I've served that I loved so dearly and the style of church that it was, and sometimes it was big and loud and impressive, but sometimes I served churches that were small and beautiful and relational. And looking back, one of the things I have come to realize is even though I loved them, I thought their front doors were too narrow for what God was doing, that we needed to plant a church with wider front doors. But even that maps directly to who God is. That those churches were also maybe conceiving of God in a narrow way. That maybe the front door of churches is a direct mirror of the God that they are serving. And so how do we think about a God that is worth showing up for? There's a couple of amazing ways that the Bible talks about God. One in the book of Haggai. Who's been reading the book of Haggai lately? No Haggai fans here? Okay, well, we'll work on that, I guess. There, God is described as the desire of nations. That what the nations, as they war and rage and plot and scheme, what they are really looking for is satisfied by the presence of Yahweh. In John 10, Jesus says, I have come so that you may have abundant life. That you may have life and have it abundantly. And in Psalm 18, it says that God has led me into a spacious place. And I fear that if I keep using this quote in every single sermon that it will lose its edge. So I didn't put it on the screen. I'm just going to say it to you this time. The comedian Pete Holmes, a deep believer in Jesus, said that when we really, truly enter the real God's presence, it feels spacious. We feel unburdened. And so part of what we have to do to be a church that the Bay Area might want to go to, or to have values that organically resonate, is to talk about a God that is worth showing up for, that when we talk about him, other people say, yes, I don't know if that's true, but I hope that it is. If you're talking about a God that leads me to a spacious place where I feel unburdened, then yes, I would check that out, right? Growing up, every sermon in my church ended with, if you got hit by a bus tonight, do you know where you would go? To heaven or hell. And I remember thinking as a kid, do we have a bus problem? What is going on with the buses in our town? And then sometime in middle school, I started thinking, well, what if you lived till 100 and you never knew the love of Jesus? Isn't that the question that we should be asking? What if you had to sojourn through all the ups and downs of humanity without a shepherd that cared for you and could carry you through it? Isn't that a more urgent question? Because I don't think we're going to be getting hit by any buses. And I've often wondered, why did the bus question become the question we were asking for decades of church? And I think it's because it feels a little vulnerable to stand up and say, oh, Jesus meets me in my deepest need. And that's why we started saying it actually doesn't matter what kind of church that we plant. It matters what kind of God that we believe in. It matters that we imagine him to be someone who could meet us in satisfying ways in our deepest need for him. So we have to start talking about God again in these ways where we say, of course he's the desire of nations. Of course he leads us to such a spacious place that if you really truly knew him or saw him, you would say, oh yes, of course I would give my life wholly and unreservedly to that because Jesus has just been so good to me. More than anything else, what we're trying to do at Dwell is recover a way of thinking about God that brings forth an enthusiastic yes from us again. One other way of saying that is to simply say, Jesus is what you're looking for. Gosh, I spent seasons of my life looking under every rock for something, and it was always Jesus that I was looking for. And And so part of what we're going to do together is reimagine what it means to follow Jesus. When we're reimagining God to be truly this good, that is the main beating heart of what Dwell Church is. Jesus is what you're looking for. And that's why we want to say we are Jesus-centered. Here's what we think we mean by that. We have a high view of Scripture. Now, we got a series coming up called Unlearning the Bible. And we're going to talk about how do we read the Bible in a way that gives life to us. Because part of what we have to really reckon with is the Bible has been read in a way that deals death to people, that is damaging in ways. So how do we put some safeguards or guidelines or practices or understandings and frameworks around it so that when we read the Bible, it feels life-giving to us? We got to really work at that in our world. To be Jesus-centered means that a friendship with Jesus is the center of the target, and that we desire that others might enter the presence of this spacious, unburdening God. That's what we mean by Jesus-centered. Now, the main reason we have Welcome to Dwell is so you can learn a little bit about the story of Dwell Church, but also so you can learn each other's stories. We're going to go a step deeper here. Good luck, everyone. Here is the question: what is a significant faith challenge that you've experienced or journeyed through? Give someone the gift of getting to know you. 12 minutes, and then I'll come back and say, do we need more time? Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. All right, everyone. What about now? Still one more minute? Or we'll survive? Okay. All right. Great job, everyone. Okay, part of the argument that we're making today is that Dwell Church core values and maybe some progressive values widely are Jesus values, that we have arrived at those values because of our faith. But part of what it will be required for us to be a church that maybe the Bay Area wants to go to is to reimagine who God is and how we talk about him. So we've been working on that. And now we're going to walk through the Dwell Church core values. But part of what we're saying here is that not only are these values that we came to because of our faith, but also we need the help of Jesus' Holy Spirit to honor these values. So when I think about some of these values, it's not because I'm especially good at them. It is not because we naturally do them well. What we're saying is we have found these things to be important because of Jesus and his teachings. But without his help, we will not be able to honor them. And so part of what we want to say around maybe diversity or inclusivity, but even also research-based and trauma-informed is, gosh, I cannot really do those things without Jesus' help. That I cannot really tend to the trauma in another person without, in some way, Jesus being at work in my heart and in my mind. I remember, and we'll talk about this in a second, at one of our Vision and Fundraiser evenings, someone said, Jesus seemed to really surround himself with traumatized people. That seemed to be like his main audience. His ministry was a trauma-informed ministry. So really, as I care for the trauma around me and the trauma that we all carry, the trauma that we bring into the room, it is because Jesus has taught me to be the kind of person that is sensitive to that in someone else's story. So part of the case that we're making is not just that these values are important, but actually that we can't do them without Jesus' help. So let's walk through some of these values for Dwell Church. We started with Jesus-centered, but a bit deeper on Dwell Church core values. What do we mean by research-based? What the heck does a research-based church even look like? I have no idea. It's a big experiment, you guys. Part of what we mean is we want to be pro-science. But part of what we mean is that we want to platform the emerging neuroscience around spirituality, because the most recent big-time studies on neuroscience are extremely pro-Christian style spirituality. That the kind of spirituality we've been teaching in churches, to be prayerful, connected with each other, to be altruistic and loving my neighbor as myself, as I learn how to do that, something really good and amazing happens in my brain. And there's a lot of brain imaging studies around this now. We'll talk about those actually over the summer. In August, we'll be doing a Neuroscience of Spirituality series so we can do a deeper dive. But those things don't prove that God exists, but what it does prove is that this is really good for us, that we can unreservedly embrace this and also our daily spiritual habits, because good things are happening biologically within us. That's part of what we mean by research-based. But we're exploring, what does it mean to take a deeper look into the research on anything in Dwell Kids or the music that we play? We want to be sensitive and partnering with the relevant science on such matters when possible. What does it mean to be trauma-informed? Part of what we mean is we want to be psychologically informed. We want to be taking in the relevant psychological concepts into the place here. As we learn how to treat each other, as we learn how to build an actual community, it requires that we become or choose to be emotionally intelligent. What does it look like to build an emotionally intelligent church? That is the question that we're asking here with trauma-informed. We want to be aware that most people experience trauma of one kind or another, and maybe it is helpful sometimes to distinguish between big T trauma or little t trauma, but all of us carry something in one or another of those two categories. Finally, we want to start thinking about like trauma-informed spirituality, where we stop asking, what's wrong with you? And we start asking something that is more curious and more helpful. What happened to you? Or what happened to me? That the parts of myself that are pointy and difficult in a community like this one, what happened in my life to where I arrived as a person that shows up with sharp edges in community? That's such a more helpful, fruitful question to be doing some introspection around instead of asking, what's wrong with me, you know? And it could be you have journeyed for a long season of your life in a church where the main question was, what was wrong with you? And you internalized that. So when things were going wrong for you, you were asking yourself, man, what is wrong with me? Why can I not get this right? It's so much more powerful to prayerfully ask, what is my story such that this is a natural behavior for me? That is a trauma-informed approach. Finally, we're doing this because we want to become a safe space. We want to be a brave space that's fiercely safe for one another. And in my lifetime, for sure, but probably you have your own story of church being not a safe space. So one of the things Brian was saying last week is, how do we become a church that is better the deeper you go into it? The more levels the steps you take deeper into Dwell Church, it just gets better and better. How do we build that kind of place with an intention to do so at the beginning, so that the more commitments you make, the more relationships you build, the more you discover, wow, this place really is a safe and good space. I think it takes having a value of being trauma-informed to become that kind of place. And it takes Jesus' help to do that together. What does it mean to be diverse? It's real simple here. The kingdom is diverse. That when Jesus describes his kingdom, it naturally, quickly became a very diverse movement. But all kinds of studies show that diverse teams and churches are smarter, more effective, more productive. Diversity is extremely fruitful. Part of what we intend here is to be a listening church. How do we listen well to one another? How do we take a posture of learning and curiosity with the different perspectives in this room? Or sometimes on our leadership team, we talk about how do we be a church that can hold difference within it? And most churches have become one way or another places that can't hold differences of opinion, like dramatic, important differences of opinion. But all those studies that are saying diverse teams are smarter, it is because they can have a conversation, have really wildly, profoundly contrasting views, and then synthesize them and work together. So we want to commit on the front end to do that. We're also casting a vision for a spirit-filled intersectional identity. That parts of my identity are made up of race, ethnicity, class, gender, all of those things. And it matters greatly if those things about me are intending to follow Jesus or not. That it isn't some incident that I was placed in those things. It isn't a mistake, but it was part of God's story of my life that I am those things. And he intended for me to live that story so that I could both experience his love within them and then also broadcast into the greater bits of culture that I exist in, his love and his transformation. We had a whole series on a spirit-filled intersectional identity. You can go back and take a look. But part of what we intend there is, man, it is powerful when you embrace God made me the way that I am, so that I can shine his love out into these parts of the intersection. So we'll keep talking about that as is helpful, but that's a real important part of Dwell Church. Diversity is something that Jesus naturally leads us into. Finally, we want to be inclusive and affirming. We think here of a deeply biblical approach. There are inclusive and affirming churches that have sort of said Bible optional. Dwell Church is not one of those. We intend full inclusion for LGBTQ plus siblings. That includes queer people in leadership and gay weddings and all of it, just 100%. We believe that a inclusive Bible reading is a better Bible reading. In June, we'll work our way through a series. We're not exactly sure what to call it, but we'll be reviewing human sexuality from a biblical perspective. That's at the heart of Dwell. We'll also be marching in the San Mateo Pride Parade in June together. So circle your calendars there. And part of what we want to be here is this is a church where everyone can experience the feeling of being seen. We want to be a church where you can feel seen and heard. Sometimes in churches in my lifetime, people said love means all kinds of things. In fact, we did a series on what love is. But I think a good way to think of what love is that you felt seen and heard. You know someone loves you if they're looking in your eyes and understanding who you are. And so we think that especially this core value, but all of them put together are going to be a place where we can have the experience of being seen and heard. And that is what I hope that you get from your season at Dwell Church. Even if it's just today, even if it's just one Sunday, I hope you've had the experience of being seen and heard. That's what we intend by Dwell's core values. And again, part of what we're saying is, man, we need Jesus' help to become these things. Not that this is our sweet spot and stuff that we're good at. Everyone should come and learn from us. But this is stuff we are committing with Jesus' help to learn. Okay. There's a couple of things, as we said, coming out of Welcome to Dwell that could be next steps for you. You could join a builder team. We hope that everyone has a job that they love here. You could become a financial partner, or you could begin or continue a daily spiritual practice. We have some innovative ways that we're looking at here for that. So if you're looking for a new way to think about your daily spiritual practices, this is great. In a moment, we're going to discuss together around your table what is your next step coming out of Dwell. It could be one of those things. It could be some other thing that you dreamed up while you were having this conversation today. It could be a next step in your faith or your family or at work. Could be a creative thing that we haven't even thought of here at Dwell that you would want to be a part of, but I'd love for you to think about what might God be calling you to in terms of a next step. After this, we'll have a few updates about what's coming up in the life of Dwell Church. But here we go. What will be your next step coming out of Dwell? One of those three, part of your faith, something else that I haven't even thought of yet. 10 minutes for this one. 3, 2, 1, go. All right. Great job. Introverts, you survived. This is the end. Here we go. A couple things coming up for Dwell Church. Next week is our second annual, what we call a Big Dark Sunday. In our world, we are mostly unprepared when the season of grief comes our way. And so one of the ways we want to approach that is by having some real explicit opportunities to prayerfully grieve together. So we'll go through some tools and frameworks for grief, but also we're asking everybody to bring an artifact, maybe conceptually, an idea, something real in your life that you are grieving or have grieved in the past. Or maybe even an artifact like a physical object that will help you sort of access those emotions. But we'll spend some time together working on our skills and approach to grieving. And then we'll just go ahead and prayerfully do it. And it feels good to not be alone. As we do so on April 20th, we'll be celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. I'm so excited. Also at 2:30 p.m., we'll be having a party in the parking lot. Everyone is invited to come and enjoy an Easter churro. That's something I'm trying to really make happen. There'll also be a bounce house and a petting zoo. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to send some mailers out to the neighborhood. That's sort of what we love to do on each major holiday, is our gift to this neighborhood, but also it's going to be a great time. Then starting after Easter, we're working on a series called Unlearning the Bible, where we're trying to develop some tools to read the Bible in a fruitful way again. And part of what we want to do there is think about our assumptions that we have been bringing to the Bible, sometimes all of our lives. Here is a little bit more. I hope this video just plays. Yeah. Is there a way of reading the Bible that helps us in our actual everyday lives? This is a question I've been asking myself since I started reading the Bible every day in the 7th grade. I went to church. Someone told me if I wanted to follow Jesus, I needed to read the Bible every day. So I did. And since then, I've been working hard to find a reading that helps me connect with Jesus, helps me love him. And I've become convinced that we're going to have to unlearn something about the Bible to arrive at a reading that helps us in our everyday lives. We have to unlearn the Bible. Lisa made that video. I can take no credit for it. It's great. Way to go, Lisa. Incredible. This is a great series. If you have a friend that's really been wrestling with their faith, thinking through all the big questions, they will feel safe and at home at Dwell, and that series is really designed to help them. But I'm excited for us together to start examining some of those assumptions that helped us sometimes arrive at very bad Bible readings. The first week we'll think about, we can all easily dream up a bad Bible reading real quick. How did we arrive at those, and how did we become people who lived by them? That's part of the question we'll talk about. In the first week, it's going to be a great series. Here is this information again. If you want to scan a QR code, you can jump in for Sustainability 3.0. Let me pray for you all. Jesus, thank you for this group of fantastic human beings. I pray that you would bless them with your Spirit. Jesus, would you be present to them? Would you draw them in? God, would you reveal yourself to them as one who is gentle and humble in heart? Would you lead them into a spacious place? And God, would you keep shaping our hearts and minds so that we can perceive you in just that way, to be as good as you truly are. God, would you bless the community that is emerging here at Dwell? Would you lead it to a sustainable place? We love you, Jesus. Bless all these people. Amen.